to episode 1 on the journey to conscious healthcare, where we explore what it takes to consciously create longevity, happiness and fulfillment in your life and that of others. The journey to conscious healthcare looks at the healthcare industry, disability sector and how to best navigate these areas to get the best for you and your life. I'm your host Trevor Keen and I'm the founder and CEO of Trevor Keen Health Services, an expert company that is known for high-quality healthcare services and transforming the healthcare industry in the disability space. This series is on support coordinators in the disability space, called the do's and don'ts of support coordination. Today's show is sponsored by Trevor Keen Health Services. At Trevor Keen Health Services, we provide high-quality NDIS healthcare services in the comfort of your own home. If you're interested in ease and reliability to navigate NDIS and access healthcare services, please get in touch. Today's guest is from a company that is an NDIS registered provider in multiple states. She is currently playing a pivotal role in expanding the company into Queensland and Northern Territory in the short term. Ellie oversees South Australian operations, however has previously worked in capacity building and plan management. She holds a Bachelor of Social Sciences, majoring in public policy, so she specialises in none other than the NDIS Act. So she couldn't be any more qualified to be speaking with us today. Ellie Grantham, welcome and thank you for joining us today from Australian Carers.
Oh, hey, friends. Thanks for having me.
I'm not a worry at all. Well, thanks for taking your time out. We're going to start with a little bit of the background into you. You could have been a pilot or could have done anything in your life, but you chose the disability sector.
Couldn't have been a pilot with my eyes. But I'm just excited I got in for the episode 1. Come on now.
Well, awesome. Tell us a little bit about your journey and what drew you to the disability sector. Everyone comes for different reasons.
Look, if you spoke to me when I was 3, I was dead set that I was going to become a ballerina. But I think towards the end of high school, I had the same motivation that many of us do that are working within disability or health, surrounding that I just wanted to help and I just wanted to support people achieving whatever their best lives look like. I thought originally that would be within law. I tried that out. My first adult job was in legal and I'm no lawyer. It's not going to be me. Working with a few lawyers, I don't mean to upset any lawyers here, but it just wasn't me. And I wanted to look into really contributing to people's lives, not just a one-off event or incident surrounding that. I wanted to be within long-term goals, really. And that led me to consider health, social work, disability, that area of things. So when I first went to uni, did a double degree surrounding social work, social planning. And I think that from that, I was already working in the sector. So I really wanted to focus and specialise on NDIS. So I altered my degree and that's how I'm sitting here. So
absolutely. I think you've undersold yourself a little bit there. I hear there's a bit of the personal journey that's brought you here. If you don't mind sharing your own story.
Look, I think that is with everyone. I think in, wanting to help people, there's an underlying or personal reason for that across the board for anyone that's within, not just disability, but health as well. For me, it was that my eyes aren't great. One of my eyes is completely legally blind and I don't use it. But more so as a teenager, I was diagnosed with epilepsy. It is now very stable, doesn't cause me too many issues whatsoever. But that wasn't necessarily what my life was going to look like. There were some weeks I was hospitalised more than I wasn't. And I saw others that didn't necessarily have the same support network that I had and privilege that I have. And my story could have looked really, really different. So I think that was my motivation surrounding it. I was, year 11, year 12, I would have been in hospital 3 times a week with overnight stays, and that has a huge impact. So functionally, I felt that. So for people that didn't necessarily have that support, I wanted to try and make something difficult as okay as it can be.
Yeah, I can really hear on that. And that sounds like resilience is a big theme that's sort of coming through there. And it sounds like this sort of underdog mentality and really overcoming adversity. what was it meant to look like? You clearly went the other way, right? There's a bit of a divergence there. You could have gone one way or the other. What could it have looked like, you think, say, if you hadn't had that privilege, as you mentioned?
Yeah, and I didn't do anything special or amazing. It's not as though I fought a condition or anything harder than anyone else that didn't necessarily have that outcome. Medically, I was really lucky. I had good meds, good doctors, and all of those kind of things. But the pivotal points that altered stuff, I think, was I had access to doctors and could get to those appointments that I needed to. And all of those sort of things where if people's finances aren't what my families were, or my parents weren't as educated as they were, or things like that, we wouldn't have been able to navigate it as well. If English was my second language, or all of those kind of things. What it could have looked like, well, if I continued having seizures at the rate that I was having them, I wouldn't be sitting here with you now. Like, it was a consideration of would I be able to work full time and those kind of things. So I was always okay. My parents are two of the best people in the world and would support unconditionally. My parents are my best friends, but not everyone has that. So even if medically the outcome wasn't what it was, I still would have been supported, but not everyone has that informal support or access to appointments and things like that. And that's where it can, I think, journey into so many different routes with one of those things missing. And I think as an industry and as a sector, we sometimes fail to recognise intersectionality and how that plays a massive role in outcomes. Yeah,
I can completely agree with that. I think what's really important to note there is that you had those opportunities and that paved the way. But I think what's really extraordinary with all that is, have a look at the role that you're performing now. Let's segue into that. So let's have a bit of a look as to your Australian Carers now, state manager, right? And you've got some pretty big projects going on. I'll let you tell the story.
I'm so proud of us, and I'm really proud of the service that we provide. So we commenced in Sydney. Our head office is within Sydney, and that's where our directors and general manager are based. We initiated supports and services within South Australia. I believe it was, I'm being tested now, it was March last year? Yeah, March last year. And at the start, it was me. And in opening it, the borders shut with COVID. So I signed my contract the week before, ready to go. And our general manager and director, he's incredible. And he is one of the people that I look up most in this world. He has taught me beyond what I could have imagined. And I was so excited to work really closely with him to set something up in Adelaide that is already there in Sydney and make it grow, and then border shut. And I had this minute of, oh my God, can I do this? That we all have. And it's so cool to look back now and go, yeah, I can do this. And I've got an amazing team that helps us do all that. And even with Reg locked in Sydney, he's been so, guidance and support is constant. But to go, oh yeah, I've done this is really cool. So our predominant service provision is within the core supports of the NDIS plan, so community support work as well as community nursing. We do also provide support coordination. We've just received our registration through at long last for level 3. So we had our audit what feels like forever ago to add that provision. So we've got that now. So support coordination 1 through 3. And support work, community nursing, all of those kind of things. So my background, I've mostly worked within more paediatric in a capacity building sense. So I'm not a nurse, obviously, but I'm so grateful. Our clinical director up in Sydney, whenever there's something that I need guidance on or support, she's always there. She's one of the most intelligent, if not the most intelligent women that I've ever met. So always in good hands with Catherine. So
that's perfect. It sounds like you're very proud of, I'm hearing a couple of things. You obviously mentioned Catherine, but Reg as well. Sounds like you're very proud of Reg has been able to support you along in your journey. But equally, I think there was this sort of element of self-doubt that you had. You weren't sure if you could do it, and you've had all this adversity come ahead, which a lot of people have faced with COVID, and you've sort of managed to thrive despite all that. That's pretty impressive.
Everyone, I think, has a story, and whether it's true or not, and capability and all of those kind of things, the amount of people I speak to that are entering the industry for support coordination, they go, look, I just don't know that, I can do this, or I don't know I've got it in me. We all have that element. I think we're lying if we say that we don't. It's a real skill, and one of the best tools you can have is a mentor, someone you look up to, someone to guide you. And in business, what he really gave me that kick up the bum to give that, you know, and he showed me, like, you can do it. Pull your head and realise I've been told not to swear by you. So, like, typically I have a real potty mouth, so I'm really watching it. Like, it was a real kick to be, you know, because human service stuff I'm pretty comfortable in, talk all day about. This type of role was a challenge for me, and it really made me realise, hold on, I can do this. I know what I'm doing.
Sounds like a real win there, and I'm hearing a few different things. I personally myself have done a fair bit of study in psychology. I find it really fascinating, and one of the things that's coming out of this whole imposter syndrome, I'm not sure if you've heard of it before, but this sort of feeling that, hey, yes, I might have the degree or the title, or might be in a position, but I really don't feel that I'm confident and capable of fulfilling that role. It sounds like you've really overcome that, and I think that's a good segue into our next question about, we've got the whole do's and don'ts of support coordination. So let's introduce the topic and let's just sort of see where it lands.
All the fun stuff.
So where's the do's and don'ts? What do you do and don't do as a support coordinator?
It depends where you're at with your journey within the role. It's always a thing of coming with the best intention, and there's a lot to learn within it. And the biggest thing that I can really encourage someone that is brand new, all of those kind of things, the best intentions sometimes lead to you biting off too big of a piece of pie and not really sticking within scope of practice. It is the most common thing I see, where they get a participant and they go, right, there's all these things, and I hear the word fix. And we're never there to fix. We're there to work in collaboration, and it comes to the basic premise of self-determination, really. So I would really encourage, look at your scope of practice, look at your learning, look at your evidence, and find a place to learn that. Because the role of support coordination now looks really, really different to what it did when I had my time as a support coordinator, which is 7-8 years ago. It was the inception of NDIS into this day, and God, that makes me realise that adds some years. Those years just keep ticking up. But it's the intention and the functionality of the role has changed. And that's not necessarily a good or a bad thing. It's just evolution. A lot of the practitioners now don't necessarily have that formal education backing. Once again, not a good thing or a bad thing. One of the best human services practitioners that I've worked with doesn't have formal qualification. They do have the capability to draw on evidence-based frameworks and theories and all of those things surrounding clinical decisions that they're making. And although we never make decisions for participants, we're there to work with them. We make clinical decisions. We prioritise. We do those things. We're lying if we say that we don't. And where people fall over is they'll go, here's the decision I'm making because I want to help. Not a good enough reason. You need an evidence, a theory, something to dictate what you're doing and why. If I've got a new support coordinator sitting in front of me, the participant that they're working on, and they tell me what they're doing, I need to go, why are you doing this? And they need to justify it. We're not shooting from the hip. If we're to do this right and proper, we're to do this in line with social science theory, and that's necessity. That equals best practice. So my biggest encouragement for someone coming in is it's really easy to look at really big picture, sit down, take your time, go buy a textbook surrounding social science theory and learn them, so that if you're coming up against something, you can back yourself. And that'll come in with your supervisor as well. You need good supervision if you're coming in at a start.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose drawing on that, unpacking, I suppose if you want to look at what it is versus what it isn't, well, we've got to start with what it is. So we talk about all those different theories, but what does a support coordinator do in a nutshell?
So their duties and roles, the scope of practice, we need to keep to disability specific. So often I hear of, Joe Blogs has this thing going on with their friend and it's a problem and they need help organising something that has nothing in relation to their disability. And don't get me wrong, that's really helpful. But it's not what you're there for. We're there to support in connecting to services, maintaining that and setting that all up. We're there also to capacity build. What people forget is that support coordination falls under that capacity building umbrella. And really, it's a role that we play so that there is that capability to do those things more independently and learn more, because the NDIS is a lot to get your head around. So to support that happening, as well as some funding monitoring support. You've got a participant that spent, 120% of their plan in 2 months, and you as a support coordinator haven't given them multiple warnings on that, you ain't doing your job. So surrounding that, as well as ensuring people are good to go for review, collating those reports, going forth, that kind of thing. There's a lot that happens more so that is not wrong. And it's a common industry thing where I go, oh, well, I've only got this amount of hours. I can't possibly do all that I'm doing within that amount of hours. And when you delve into what support coordinators are doing with those hours, may not necessarily be what the purpose of that funding is.
Well, it sounds a lot like swimming in your own lane. It sounds like some people are not swimming in their own lane, and this is what's sort of causing a bit of an issue and a bit of a misconception in regards to what funding is for and what it isn't. I mean, when I talk about what is an NDIS plan and what do we do, well, fundamentally, say if we don't have any normal people, but if we did, there's normal, someone with a disability, and then there's a gap, right? And so the disability is what causes the gap there, and that's what the NDIS is all about, right? It's there to actually make sure it can fill the gap so that there's no disadvantage. And I think a lot of people aren't quite clear on that, and I think you're alluding to that in regards to health and really getting into a lot of people doing health-related stuff when it's just like, well, there's a difference between disability and health-related.
And that comes to the most appropriate, if we're talking in the plan, it comes to the most appropriate funding body. And it's this thing that NDIS talks about that sounds horrid on first premise of this normal everyday life. I hate the word normal.
No one's normal,
because no one's normal, and living with disability doesn't mean that you're not normal. It's it's crazy to me. But in this, like when the NDIS first kind of appeared, it was a wonderful thing of you get the choice and control to choose what your services look like and your supports look like and all of those things. Fantastic thing.
So in regards to normal everyday life, I know no one's exactly normal as such, but the NDIS is really there to fill the gap between someone that there is no one that's normal, but let's say there was, and then there's someone with a disability, the difference between the two to make sure that there's no disadvantage, that's what the scheme's really there for. It's not there to provide health-related supports. That's under a different funding body. Is that sort of how you see that as well? Or?
It comes to jurisdiction of it, and I think sometimes we fail to acknowledge that health leads into disability and disability leads into health. If we look at the social determinants of health, then intersectionality isn't appreciated as much as it needs to be. However, there's a clear breakdown surrounding what is medical versus what is disability supports. And you're right, the purpose of NDIS is to really lead as independent and as that, my NDIS language, not mine, of normal everyday life. Because what is normal everyday life? It doesn't exist. So I don't love the phrase, but I fully appreciate that the purpose of it is there to close that gap, I suppose, of challenge of if you weren't necessarily living with disability.
No, I totally understand that. I think that segues into a couple nice questions about, say, where do you go to get your information? You're a support coordinator. Who are your sources? Do you go to My Care Space, or do you go to the Growing Space? So there's heaps of different organisations out there. I mean, there's peak bodies. Who do you go for information?
This sounds so basic, but if I was walking into a role without the background that I've got, the first place I go is the NDIS website. There is so much on there that people don't acknowledge. I would print off, printing balance, considered, that the price guide and read it through with a fine-tooth comb. And that's actually, although incredibly boring, what I get support coordinators, if they walk through the door on day one, that is the first thing I get them to do. I print off that monster of a document and have them read it, because then when I give interactive training surrounding, okay, like this is the day-to-day function or this is what we do, and, we of course host training regularly to update on certain things that are happening, because there's always changes and alterations, whether it be from an AAT decision whether it be from a new price guide or ruling or whatever it may be, I will always give the current price guide, because then if you spot something as you're going through your internal training or whatever it may be, you can cast your mind back and be like, oh, yeah, that makes sense. Because there are some people coming in, and there's nothing wrong with this in being so – everyone's got to have day one somewhere where it's so fresh of going – I don't even know what the buckets are called, or what's the difference between core and IDL. Like it's all of those things, and I think it acts as a really nice reference point. I mean, absolutely, like the organisations that you've mentioned are incredible organisations. The struggle that people will face in gaining advice, and the same thing can be me speaking today, is we're not a governing body, and that's the pro of going to the NDIA, publish documents, calling the 1-800 number. Sometimes you're going to get really good advice, sometimes not so hot advice, but that's depending on who you get on the phone. Everyone's got best of intention, but sometimes, people's knowledge and training are going to be more than others. The thing with the published documentation from the NDIS is there's no grey area. It's been published by the government body itself. That is right information.
Yeah, and what's your thoughts then about NDS? Because you've got NDS, which sits above the NDIS itself.
Yeah, also a very, very good resource. I typically find everything that someone on their first day needs is sitting on that NDIS website. You get to learn as you go and things like that. But if you're going bare bones, what can I do, what can't I do, I need to know what something is, you're going to get it from there.
On the website.
Yeah.
Well, I think there's a good one here. We're talking about information. RNN, what is it and what does it compile of? This is a pretty topical question.
Oh, it is. It is, Trevor. Okay.
Yeah, you say reasonable and necessary, hey?
Yeah, and you will hear it, and it's, we talk of the website, and it's all across the website of reasonable and necessary supports. And it sounds pretty simple, and in some ways it is, and in other ways it's not, because what is reasonable and necessary for one person is not going to be reasonable and necessary for another. In saying that, as providers, we are not determinants of that. So if you have a planner, LAC, representative of the agency is your determination of RNN. It is never for us as support coordinators, providers, plan managers, physios, OTs, whatever, to go, yeah, this is reasonable and necessary for you, or it's not. We can raise concerns around it, but never, ever, ever should I hear of a support coordinator going, no, you can't have that.
Well, let's break that down into two sides then, I guess, because I remember you speaking recently in regards to financial restrictive practices. But we'll take that one second. But the first is if we're trying to justify a reasonable or necessary, dare we say we're trying to go in for a plan review or change of circumstances, we need evidence. How do we justify what is reasonable or necessary?
So from the clinician reports are going to be your best bet in going for that. And it comes down to what it is we're actually trying to obtain. The NDIA have a responsibility to undertake clinical recommendations and apply them, as well as within the scheme as a whole. I say scheme twice, but in the scheme of the scheme. So within reasonable funding levels. But if you have your physio saying, you know what, for these reasons you need physio once a fortnight, and it meets within NDIS jurisdiction, it's not better funded by health or all of those things that come into reasonable and necessary, then they need to abide by that recommendation.
Yeah, well, it's an interesting topic. I'll delve in a bit deeper here because I think this is quite topical, not only for support coordinators but also for participants. I mean, if there is more funding that is required, how do we go about justifying that more? In our business, we provide allied health services, we do reports all the time. How do you best do it? I know we've got the Act, and I suppose given your expertise and background, maybe I'll sort of delve in a bit closer as to what do we need to provide in that report. It's not just because no reports you get two reports, right? They're not just the same. If you've got someone that writes the right words in the right order, they can change people's lives. Whereas if not,
and that's the real privilege barrier as well. If you've got people that understand the system, understand the scheme, understand interpretation, and know the right wording to use, it can really impact funding outcomes. It's really topical at the moment surrounding psychosocial disability. I see it a lot where the words mental health are utilised interchangeably with psychosocial disability, and they're not. mental health, jurisdiction of health, psychosocial disability, jurisdiction of NDIS. And that's functional, non-strengths-based term, but that's functional impairment. So we're looking at those two things. So the second you talk about, crisis mental health, for example, NDIS will just go, okay, like that'd be beneficial for that, but it's not within our jurisdiction. And that's talking about that health to disability split that we had before. And it is scary in how much those wordings can matter. For example, if you've got a child and we're talking about educational skill, the first thing they'll do is go, well, that's debt responsibility, But if we change that to life skill, suddenly it's the jurisdiction of NDIS. Yeah. So it's that thing. But if you don't have adequate funds, if you've received your plan back and you go, you know what, this isn't enough, this doesn't align with our reports, then you can place an internal review.
Yeah.
What that means is someone else internally within the NDIS will review the decision made. They'll look at the exact same information that the first person had and see if they come to the same determination. If they don't, the thing to keep in mind is a review of a decision doesn't necessarily equate to more money. So even if they say, yes, we'll go for a review, it's starting fresh.
Yeah.
You're at ground zero. You could actually lose money. That person could go, you know what, because of this reason, this reason, and this reason, you don't get that money.
Yeah, I can understand that. That sort of reminds me of, I spoke to, in a webinar the other day, Aaron Byrne, who's from the community engagement wing of the NDIS. He was presenting, he was sort of being very transparent. It was fantastic actually to see him being so transparent about, hey, this is what we do and this is what happens in certain areas and what to fund and what not to, and really coming down to the nitty gritty. He made it very clear and succinct about what it was and what it wasn't.
Yeah.
And I think as long as we've got a bit more black and white, because I think we live in a world of grey in the NDIS, I think that makes it a lot easier for many people because we've got so many people coming into the sector in droves, but I think the level of education and understanding and effectiveness is probably not where it needs to be right now. I know we're heading in the right direction, but we've got a little bit of work to do. Moving to our second part of the question there, I guess, and what we're talking about is financial restrictive practice. I don't know if you want to just expand upon what that is, because I know we have firsthand actually had some people come back to us about a report and whether it should be paid for or not, and I'd like to get you to unpack it if you can.
Yeah, and look, it's financial restrictive practice comes from often the place of best intention of I'm going to let this person know that this doesn't necessarily fit the guideline. It may not. It's not your decision to make. So for that, say if we go to the report, for example, that wasn't funded, say if it was, they received an invoice for...
I'll give you the situation if you like. So we had I won't mention any names, of course, but as we were going through it, we're like, all right, we had a functional capacity evaluation. I think it was for 10 or maybe 12 hours.
That's a low billing for an FCA.
Yeah, I know. That's exactly what I thought. I called up the CEO of this company and had a bit of a chat with them as well, and they sort of wanted to report us because I was saying, hey, this is a lot of money. Keep in mind that includes the travel, the assessment, and then the report writing. And I suppose a report that you do, someone who's very simple, dare I say it, versus a complex situation, that report's going to be longer for someone who's complex versus someone who's simple. We couldn't understand and get our head around, hey, so you're, as a plant manager who's not qualified in doing occupational therapy reports, how is it that you're telling us that this is an expensive report? Like, I don't really understand. So if you might maybe use that example.
Yeah, look, in that situation, if they wanted to report you to the commission, let them. Commission aren't silly. They'd see it and they'd go, this is a reasonable amount of time. Of course, plan managers, and not picking on plan managers, any provider, should raise concern to the participant and keep that dialogue open when needed. And everyone's entitled and open to make a complaint to the commission if they so see fit. The commission on the phone will probably say, hey, this isn't our jurisdiction and this is where you got ahead, but that is their prerogative. Where the financial restrictive practice comes in, for example, if they said, no, this report is too many hours and it's not reasonable and necessary and we're not going to pay it for that reason. iPads are one of the things most spoken about, and where you spoke of areas of grey, and I think where the areas of grey comes in is what is needed for one may not be needed for another person. If we look at iPads where people are going, my best friend's brother's sister got the iPad, so therefore I get it too. No, the situation's completely different. And that's where I think people feel that area of grey kind of is.
Yeah, I hear you with that, because you might know of Sam Payer from the growing space. I remember she had an article recently might have been a few months ago. It was actually in regards to fingernails, fake fingernails. This lady ended up getting it deemed as reasonable and necessary for her to have fake fingernails. And the reason in that article that it went through was that she was actually trying to type. She had a particular disability that ended up meaning that she had issues with her nails, and so she ended up getting these extensions put onto a nail so that she could end up typing and working. So it was a functional issue.
Yeah.
So it was really to do with function. It wasn't anything to do with looking beautiful. It wasn't aesthetic reasons. It was all to do with the functional limitation of, hey, because of that disability, that ended up meaning that they couldn't do it. So this whole term of reasonable and necessary, I've sort of raised this before. I was talking to a lawyer only last week, and I was saying, hey, maybe do we need to get lawyers involved into the reasonable and necessary? I don't want to have more litigation. But I think it's just the clearer we can make this. And
well, if it goes to the AAT, there's often lawyers involved in our determination.
I mean, we're not trying to go that way. I suppose what I'm trying to say, I guess, is I think we need to get a little bit clearer with how to justify, and if we can stop wasting time and money on reports that get done that then aren't successful, I guess. There's two sides to that, I guess, about practitioners and providers getting better at knowing what to write.
Yeah.
But equally, the agency could be a bit more transparent, I think. I'd love Linda Reynolds to take that on board as far as, how can we get a little bit more transparent about having providers informed so that they know what to write? Because ultimately, we don't want to have big reports with money spent on. We want to make sure that money spent on therapy and capacity building and increasing function, because that's getting closer towards goals, right?
And it comes to, as well, it's that age-old thing of not any plan manager in particular, but I've heard of it where they kind of put forward, and it'll be a level 1, level 2 AT, so coming out of core, being like, oh, you need an OT report or a physio report in order for us to put that through. Hold on a minute. I get that you want to make sure that person's covered, but you are no one to say, hey, go get a report to justify this. There's no authoritative level to that. And that comes to the determinant of RNN. It's taking away that dignity of risk of participant. Of if we say, okay, let's use the fingernail example, and for that particular individual, 100%, like it's there for functionality. For 99.9% of NDIS participants, would getting nails done be no, it'd be reasonable, like it'd be everyday expense, but for her it's not. So just because it's everyday expense for one doesn't make it everyday expense for others. But say if you had, she submitted the invoice, I don't even know. I personally don't know of this case study, so she might not even be plan managed. But say she submitted that to the plan manager and they called and said, it's one thing to go, I'm concerned that this may represent as an everyday expense. Can we get a little more information just for auditing instances? That's completely fine. That is supporting the participant to make the choice. What wouldn't be okay is if they contact and say to that individual, in order for me to pay this invoice, you need to provide me with a report to process it. Or better yet, you know what, this isn't reasonable and necessary and I won't pay it. Nothing to do with their role. And if they don't pay it and the agency then deems it reasonable and necessary and that it should be paid, in this case absolutely should be paid. So very unofficially.
I'd be very interested in throwing it out to plan managers if they want to come back to us and go over a couple of examples of this having happened or not, or how they actually are facilitating a participant choice, because ultimately that's what you're saying and advocating for.
Yeah, and the dignity of risk as well. So don't get me wrong, I've heard of, and very unofficially for people to determine, I'm not a determinant of RNN, but there are some crazy things that I've seen, like really crazy things, and they're just not reasonable. They don't meet the requirement, not for me to say or tell them or enforce, however. But it's how we approach those things. It's how both as support coordinators and plan managers surrounding that. So we do have a responsibility to go, let's go the most basic of every day. A fridge. Someone wants to buy a fridge. I'm pulling something. We have a responsibility to go, hey, it's a $5,000 fridge, by the way. It's one of those ones that opens and you can see through and it's the dream fridge. We have a responsibility to go, not sure that this is disability specific. Can we get some information surrounding that? Because I have the concern that in instance of audit, it would be deemed that this wasn't necessarily, disability specific one, which equals to RNN. There's a few different breakdowns to what something needs to be to feature reasonable and necessary under the NDIS. Also, if it was disability specific, if it does this represent value for money for what you're needing it for? Does the $5,000 fridge, whatever it is I said, how expensive it was, does that represent value for money for your disability-related need? And then back to the disability-specific, or is it an everyday expense? Does everyone need a fridge? So is it the most appropriate funding source? And I see a lot of most appropriate funding source for things like psychology. You know, it was a real great almost uproar that psychological therapy, what was understood to be now, isn't funded. Like your CBT trial, that's never been funded. That's under health. If we're looking at functional impact, which cognitive behavioural therapy doesn't focus on, that's health. And I appreciate that the mental health system needs an overhaul and it's bad. I get that. But that can't make it NDIS's jurisdiction. We just can't do that.
I appreciate that. I was also at SA's, it was the Mentally Healthy Breakfast. I think John Mannon, the MP, was speaking then, and I think you'd be happy to hear that as far as making sure, once again, we're swimming our lane. Mental health is, if it is a health-related thing, let's keep it in that. And if it's disability-related, let's keep it in the NDIS space. Moving on to, because this whole topic's been a little bit stressful, I guess, talking about this whole reasonable necessary, and there's a few little bits to unpack about it all. Let's go over to support coordinators. So how would you suggest that support coordinators handle the stresses and the constant obstacles thrown at them in that way, and also look after themselves along the journey?
The biggest thing you can have in your toolkit is awareness of yourself. Because what is self-care? And it needs to be self-care, otherwise you will burn out. It will be a thing of, and it's individual. What is self-care for me is not self-care for you.
Yeah.
You know, self-care for you may be a run. I'm just going to feel like I'm dying if I'm running. That's not going to be self-care for me.
Yeah.
And it's not necessarily the things that we think of as self-care, whether it be your bubble bath or glass of wine or watching your Netflix is self-care, the things that make you feel good. It could be dedicating certain periods of your day to ensuring that you're through your emails and organising them. It could be being across your time blocking and things like that. Or the biggest one of the biggest challenges I see for support coordinators is there's often so much going on there. Point of contact for so many people that they'll be working on something and then they grab a phone call and then they go on to this and then they go on to that, and it's little bits everywhere. So ensuring that you stick to your boundaries of, you know what, no, I'm working on this, I'm going to work on this for the next half an hour and then I'm going to call Trevor back. You know, it's those kind of things. And taking that outside of work as well. You can't be the saviour of everything.
Yeah.
And I think so many people take so much on. It's a positive and it's a negative because it shows you don't take stuff on if you don't care. You have to care.
Right?
Yeah, you have to care, but you've got to be able to block it off. And it comes with time in the industry. That green person that I spoke of wanting to do everything and almost save the world, the reason I'm so harsh on it and harsh on my team about it is because that was me. That was typical new grad me. If something needs doing, why not? Let's just do it.
So it was your story and also your journey.
Yeah, and I'm huge on it now because we're actually doing a detriment to the participant. If we go, let me do all of these things, they'll think that you're great and the relationship is wonderful. But that's not, you're making yourself a part of their lives when you shouldn't be.
I understand that. And I suppose mainly actually from a physiotherapy standpoint, the amount of time that you'll be working with someone and they'll actually need to do things for themselves. And what you probably see this day in, day out, support workers, an example, support workers doing things for participants when they shouldn't be. They need to actually stand up.
Support work is a huge one.
It's a topical issue, and I think it's really...
Let's be friends with our clients. Yeah. No! It is one of the things that makes me the grumpiest. It's like, let's be friends and be... No, we are not there to be their friends. How condescending. This is going to be like really controversial, and I'm sure that people will be upset with me for this. Should we build positive working relationships? Absolutely we should. Should we be empowering participants to undertake goals and all of those things? Sure. Support them in making their own friendships.
Yeah.
Because let's call it what it is. A support worker is a paid position. It is a formal role. There is a power imbalance there.
Yeah.
That is not a friendship.
I suppose I lead that into let's use an example with OT and reports in that space, as far as sometimes people engage the therapist thinking, hey, I'm just going to buy you words and spend money on that. It's sort of that imbalance as well. Like, as in, ultimately, we're trying to facilitate people to achieve their goals and dreams.
Absolutely.
How are we going on that journey? That's the conversation I'm interested in. That sounds like the one that you want to undertake as well.
And it's not necessarily what our viewpoint is their goals and dreams.
Yeah.
We can have this picture of what someone's life, quote unquote, should look like. Who on earth are we to determine that? For example, say if you've got a participant that lives in a really messy home, for example, and they're aware that it's messy, but that's how we like it. So as support coordinators, the first thing, you add your opinion to things. So you sit there and you go, you know what, we're going to get you a cleaner. We're going to get this through so that it feels tidy space, tidy mind. We're going to do all the things. Did you ask that person if that's what they want? They may like living in things in, a bit of an organised chaos for them. Permitting it's not a health risk and that's another discussion and all of those kind of things.
It's an absolutely fascinating conversation to have there, because I suppose it's not for us to go in. I've had many conversations with Tim, one of our lead occupational therapists, and he talks regularly about, some people don't want to get onto the NDIS in order to have their disability needs met. And it's really important that we respect that they're right to do or not do something. It's equally as important as saying, hey, yes, we'll facilitate you on the journey, as, hey, we'll facilitate you not to undertake a certain choice as well.
Yeah, and it's one of the coolest things I heard, I think, in first year uni of they are the expert of their own lives. And it underpins AESW and that code of ethics, which I think aligns really nicely to social work, support coordination, sorry.
Should we unpack that just so that we got the name of it? ASW, so double ASW?
Yes, so, AESW, so the Australian Association of Social Workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
So I find that code of ethics aligns really nicely to the position of support coordination. There's others that it does too, but when in doubt, I refer to AESW, although not being a member. But it's a thing of this premise and idea of self-determination. The participant, client, whatever language we're using, they are the expert in their own life. And we just work in collaboration with them. If we see, for example, cool, you've got all of this money for support work, we'll get you a support worker 8 hours a day so that you can go to the shops and you can do this and you can get that. And it's really easy because you're so excited to go, let's get these outcomes. That's not the outcomes the person wants.
Yeah.
That person may not like people. They may not want to be around someone 8 hours a day. So that's when your skill comes into place of going, okay, well, what does that person want and how can we look at that?
Yeah, it's a fascinating picture and viewpoint, certainly very valid, absolutely. And I think it's probably something that I'm not sure how widely it's undertaken by others. Do you think that's very well understood?
I think it's a challenge that we face in the industry and systematically, and it comes back to how I said about not everyone has that formal background. Don't get me wrong, formal tertiary education does not make you a great support coordinator, and not having it doesn't make you a bad support coordinator.
Well, is it worth unpacking, like, as an example, social workers, support coordination, level 3 particularly, generally speaking, social workers, doesn't have to be, but generally speaking has been, and also you look at social workers, how they're highly regarded in hospital setup, and they do a lot of that complex care and navigation in challenging life stages. It's very interesting because, and I'm a huge believer in lived experience and also, as you said, evidence-based theories and making sure that they're applying various different things. It's just fascinating how it's gone from, say, social workers to people that haven't got qualifications and I don't have a problem with that as long as they've got some sort of experience and, that they're upskilling in the role. I think that's really important.
If we're being really realistic, blunt and honest to it, it's a supply and demand thing. When support coordination first came in, the intention and the guide of suitability that doesn't exist anymore. The guide to suitability was surrounded, to be registered, was surrounding tertiary education. And once again, I'm not here to, if someone doesn't have a degree, whatever. There are other ways to learn that. But it's that thing of, even with lived experience, where it's something as basic as self-disclosure. For example, look, the participants that I've worked with, do they know that I can't use one eye to see? No. Why would I tell them that? It's a self-disclosure. There needs to be a really clear, almost benefit to cost analysis of, does it benefit the participant to know this about me? more than it doesn't, and what is the purpose? Off the top of my head, I can't think of a good reason whatsoever to tell a participant that I've got eyesight challenges. It's lazy rapport building.
Yeah.
Because we do it in our friendships, in our personal relationships and things like that, where we go, someone may mention, oh, my glasses need to be stronger. And I'm taking the eyesight example because that's what I've touched on. My glasses need to be stronger. And you go, oh, my God, me too. I was at OPSM last week and they've told me that I'm this script and blah, 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 blah. Like, that's the friendship conversation. It's not about a friendship or relationship that is about me whatsoever with the participant. So I can't think of a good reason whatsoever, even if I'm working with someone that is visually impaired, as I am, if I go, oh, my God, me too, be better. Build the relationship better. Do a competent, capable job that is built on evidence surrounding what you're doing to build that positive working relationship. There should never be an, oh, my God, me too moment in service provision.
Oh, I understand that. I can hear and see your real pull for doing better. That leads us on to our final question today.
Mm-hmm.
So it's 20 years' time and we've achieved success in the disability sector.
Oh, God, yeah.
What does it look like? What does it feel like? Paint me a picture.
I think so. The move, you've got me on the hop with this question, Trevor. Do I think NDIS was a positive step forward? Absolutely, I do. It gives so much more choice, control, but there are still systematic issues across the board. I think that we need to level out because although comes with choice and control, there is not necessarily a quality concern. So if we're going with, yes, this is the person I choose to use and this is what I like for my supports, that should occur. But what people should also be receiving is a qualified and competent service provision. And that sometimes is lost in this scheme, I think. So what that looks like, I don't have the solution. Otherwise, I'd be up there at Parliament yelling it. And hell, maybe one day I'll come to it.
Maybe.
But I think that we need to combine the aspects of choice and control within NDIS, which underpins and needs to stay. I am done and I am over hearing, no, that person can't have this. No, that doesn't align with that. We need to do it this way. The person's the determinant of that.
Yeah.
But also at the same time, as you would know, there's a difference in physiotherapists, for example. I'm sure you've got really, really great ones and ones that maybe just don't have the knowledge or, aren't as across. And that's one where there's APRA backing, so that protects and provides some of that quality and all of those kinds of things. But we need more accountability and we need to ensure that the disability-related services that people are accessing are there. Because don't get me wrong, people living with disability are capable, confident people. But there are some instances where people are in vulnerable situations and are at risk for people to take advantage of that. And I think with our system, how it is, it's too open to do that.
Yeah, I can really understand that. My sister's got an intellectual disability and it sounds like what success looks like for you in the future is there's the choice and there's the quality, and it just sounds like we've really leveled up. We've really leveled up in order to be able to provide the opportunities for people with disability that they need, also 100% respecting where they come from, and we're not determining where their life goes. They're the controller and they sort of have the direction, but really fulfilling with the hopes and aspirations that they have, and then really helping them on that journey, maybe even being a guide possibly. Is that sort of how it looks? And
the intersect of what different aspects of people look like. For example, culturally competent service.
Yeah.
And in looking at if we've got a participant that is also Aboriginal Australian, ensuring the cultural needs, requirements and preferences are met.
Yeah.
And ensuring that that's there and appreciating that what we have through almost a white lens isn't necessarily what is suitable. And that's where we'll get engagement as well. But you're absolutely right. For people that are in vulnerable situation, I think my biggest push is, and it comes to a demand thing, like, oh, there's this NDIS and people can choose their providers. Cool, we'll go do that. It's like, if we're doing this properly, education surround it is long-term thing. So if we go to the do's and don'ts of support coordinators, the biggest don't I can say is you don't know it all. The biggest do I can say is learn that, appreciate it, and take it all in. I still don't know anywhere near to everything. It's a forever ongoing journey, as is towards culturally competent service. It's never that you go, yes, I've got this now. I will never have as much knowledge as I need to have. It is just I need to keep striving for that. So focus on your professional development, take it seriously, and engage with it.
Well, that's some pretty profound final words there, Ellie. Thank you very much. We've been talking to Ellie Grantham, who is a state manager in South Australia for Australian Carers, nationalising. Ellie, where can people go to hear more about what you do and what Australian Carers do?
Honestly, always open for a chat. Contact number is 1-800-330-800, so call with us on the phone. We always love having a chat. Also, our website, if you just Google Australian Carers, it will come straight up. I don't know the exact link, but it's australiancarers.com.
Thank you so much.